This episode, Sileem and Justin are joining me again from Tokyo. Not too many people are traveling anywhere these days, and I do hope that one day we will do this in person, guys. But until then, we're going to do it through Zoom like we always have. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you. Good to be back. And really looking forward to the day that we can actually do this in person. That'll be amazing.
Yeah, same here.
So positive intelligence, we're gonna talk about that. We did this survey, and for those that want to actually pause this and maybe have a little bit more to relate to, I invite you to go to positiveintelligence.com and take the free saboteur assessment, which would allow you to actually think about your own saboteurs, and we'll get into that as you listen to this episode. So feel free to go back and do that. Each of us have done this assessment. We've chatted about it a little bit back and forth, read a little bit of the book by Shirzad Chamine, which I actually have a hard copy of it now. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Think Week. Bill Gates takes a Think Week every year, and I find that very interesting, some of the concepts behind that, and it dovetails, I think, quite nicely with the positive intelligence conversation. And then we'll finish up with an interesting or strange news story. But before we do that, quick Olympics update. And of course, when these recordings come out, they tend to be a couple weeks, sometimes longer, after when they actually hit the airwaves from the time we talk about it. But can you guys share a little bit of insight around the whole ramp up to the Olympics? As of this recording, it's 4 weeks away?
Yeah, exactly. We're exactly 28 days away, so 4 weeks away from the opening ceremony. So I guess people can figure out how long it takes you to edit an episode and put it up.
That's right. Yeah. So, from a local perspective, would be interesting just hearing a little bit about what you guys are seeing from your side as this ramps up. From the outside Japan perspective, we do hear a lot about how most Japanese people don't want these Olympics to happen. The vaccination rate is pretty low, although I hear it's ramping up. What's the inside scoop you guys can share about the ramp up to the Olympics?
Justin, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in real quick. So take it from a couple quick angles. Last time we spoke about this on the podcast, we were discussing it from the angle of, would this even happen? And we were both leaning on the side of, yeah, most definitely it's going to happen. There's a lot riding on it business-wise, and a lot of different organizations like Dentsu, the big advertising and marketing firm that has a lot sunk into this. And now we're at the point where it's more about logistics and about getting things set up. So, once the bureaucracy machine gets in full motion here, there's kind of no stopping it. So when it comes to things like defining the routes that the buses will take and the alternate routes that regular commuters and drivers will take, all that stuff, the signage and everything else is going up. And it's almost like, well, look, we put up the party streamers, we have to throw a party. So at this point, I think we're full on, 100% all in. This is going to happen. So logistic things like spectators, which they're still kind of defining what that's going to look like, what the max numbers are going to look like, whether or not that's going to happen. There was some speculation as to whether or not people who had gotten the tickets in the lottery, whether they'd have to do a new lottery to see which of those people would be able to attend events because the spectator numbers are lower. But it looks like there's enough of those tickets that were allocated for people outside of Japan, since it's only domestic spectators that are going to be going, that most of the events, they're already telling people that if the events will have spectators, your tickets will be valid. So they won't have to go through a whole fresh round of lottery to see whether or not they're going to be going in. There have been multiple athletes who've recently arrived that did have COVID and they've had to quarantine, and some on the same team.
I had not heard that
as well. So there's that part of it. There's also the part of it that some towns have pulled out of hosting. At first, it was more the social aspect of them being able to be part of the community and the community meeting these athletes from these different countries. And some of these are countries that those cities have reciprocal relationships with. They've had some kind of relationship with in some form of commerce or tourism over the years. So it's a bit challenging from an optics standpoint, even to maintain hosting them, because there's such an intense need to maintain a bubble whenever they are hosting them. So there's all that additional cost as well. So it's going to be a shell game as to figuring out where all these athletes are going to be practicing and getting ready for their actual events. But as it stands, it's full steam ahead, and I'd say that most folks are not really looking forward to it too much. And then dovetailing that into the vaccinations.
Is it the community of Japan, or is it more Japanese people that don't want the Olympics to happen?
Well, it was overwhelmingly Japanese, but I mean, Sileem, you've probably seen some of the surveys as well. Maybe you could speak a little bit more to this if you've noticed anything.
Yeah, I mean, well, the expat community is tiny here, right?
Right.
I mean, I think that like Japan is 98% like ethnic Japanese, just pure Japanese, and 2% from all others. So,
Right.
There's not a lot of statistics or not a lot of information that comes out of the expat community or non-Japanese communities within Japan. But what I can say is, yeah, it's overwhelmingly the country and the people don't want the Olympics to go ahead. Some senior health officials have also said that, okay, the Olympics are happening. The least worst scenario is to just do it, not have any spectators come in, and just get it done. But the government has gone ahead and approved having, I think, latest information we have is like up to 10,000 or 50% of the arena or stadium limit, whichever is smaller. That's the latest I've heard. But yeah, it's full steam ahead. It's going to go through, and we're just going to have to see what happens.
Well, I'm glad I didn't put money on it, because I know I was in the camp of this isn't going to happen 6 weeks ago, maybe now. But one quick thing before we move on. What was the sentiment about having these Olympics before COVID? Like, my guess is there was probably a good percentage of people that did not want the Olympics at all, regardless of COVID. Am I right with that? Or?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a massive drain on the public purse. It's super expensive, and PR wise, obviously the government wanted to have this Olympics. It's a source of national pride. In a sense, it was a message from the government saying Japan is back, kind of, after still it's still the case where the economy is fairly stagnant, but it's just a message to the world saying Japan is back here, like here we are. And but from a regular person's perspective, right, as a taxpayer, you're thinking, we have this event where tons of people come. It doesn't. It's a drain on on the public purse. It's all tax. A lot of it is taxpayer funded, and if you live in Tokyo, and it's just an absolute nightmare. Like back before COVID, in your regular on any regular day, with all the tourists that were around, things were pretty crowded, right? I mean, you don't need. In fact, the tourists just really add to it. But imagine having tens of or hundreds of thousands of people coming into Tokyo at the same time for the Olympics. It was just going to be an absolute nightmare for regular people living here and trying to go to work and trying to get things done. So I think there was quite a bit of opposition even before COVID.
It just made me think it's a bit tough. Like, it's easy to just say, well, guys, come on to planet Earth here, and you're not going to have the event. It's insane to think you're going to do this event. Just move on. However, if you were as invested in the Olympics as the people that have organized this thing, I think there's going to be a real we did it thing to this. Like, and wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a slogan of some type. We
For
did
sure.
it. Like,
Yeah.
so.
Well, don't forget about the optics of China being the next Olympics. So if China were to hold an Olympics in 22 that goes off swimmingly and Japan has to cancel or not actually have the Olympics, the optics of that from a national pride standpoint and from some of the regional tension is probably not ideal from a Japanese political perspective either.
And isn't it like early 22 as well? It's like
It's the winter.
January or February or something, right? Yeah. So it's only a few months away. So imagine for the Japanese government, it's like not having the Summer Olympics now, and then just a few months later, the world descends on China for the Winter Olympics, and they hail it as a massive success.
Well, back to my comment then about timing. In a way, Beijing may actually end up being perfect timing for where we'll be in the world with all of this.
Yeah.
That Tokyo just simply can't afford to wait that long. It's just can't wait that long. There's millions of reasons why, logistics, all that stuff, but and even just backing it up to how close the next Olympics are. So, okay, well, let's talk about positive intelligence. We're always looking for topics to discuss on the podcast, and I came across the positive intelligence, or PQ for short. I came across it through someone I know who had gone through this course maybe a year ago, and I was immediately hooked in terms of what it was saying, and I'll just give a little bit of an overview of it. So Shirzad Chamine is the creator of this, not the creator of positive motivation or positive thinking. That's not his creation at all. That's been around for a while, that positive thinking movement. But what he's created is a program around positive intelligence. And to cut right into what it is each of us has these saboteurs that cause stress, all of our stress, our anxiety, self-doubt, frustration, regret, shame, unhappiness, guilt. Hopefully we're not tensing up as we hear those words, but maybe we are. And that these saboteurs are all different types. There's 9 of them. And he's called them, the chief one is called the judge. And then there's the controller, the avoider, the victim, the stickler, and 5 other saboteurs that are constantly operating to sabotage you. And at one time, these were strengths or things that were meant to protect you. Like in early childhood, one of the things they say in the book is the first 16 years of your life, these saboteurs, these things that are causing you to be hypervigilant, so that you don't get eaten by a tiger, all had a purpose when you were in the first 16 years of your life. They call it the survival brain. But as we pass into adulthood and 2021, modern times, a lot of these saboteurs are not useful to us. We don't need life-saving saboteurs to come in and protect us. So the flip side of it is something called your sage, which lives in an entirely different region of the brain, handles challenges in ways that produce positive emotions. So in opposite to those other ones I mentioned, things like curiosity, empathy, creativity, calm, clear-headed, laser-focused action is the job of the sage. And by focusing more on sage characteristics, you're more likely to be better, feel better, perform better, be happier, etc. So we each took this assessment. The positiveintelligence.com has the assessment about identifying our saboteurs. I was not surprised by the results that I got of what my top saboteurs were. So when you do the assessment, you'll get a ranking of your saboteurs from top to bottom, and you'll get a score beside each. And looking at the three of our assessments, we each have some different saboteurs that rank up there. And the scoring for each also differs across the board. So what I wanted to do was talk about any surprises in terms of what you saw in the results, any insights you gained from what you saw in the results. Then we can maybe unpack it a little bit from there and move into that Think Week that we were talking about earlier. How does that sound?
That sounds good. Justin, you want to go?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Justin, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'll kick off. Yeah, I'm quite familiar with a lot of personality profilers, both because of my work previously doing consulting work and now on the executive search side and supporting people and organizations whenever they are bringing people on board. And a lot of different companies have variations of personality profilers. Never quite like this. This one's a bit different, comes at it from a slightly different angle, and definitely is more from the side of identifying and working with and working through an improvement. And with that in mind, taking any survey like this, I'm going to come at it from the angle of my previous experience. So there's a healthy amount of kind of taking the 30,000 foot view when the questions are coming in and maybe seeing where the angles are headed with some of the questions. So does that skew my results? Maybe it does. Or maybe that's just partly my personality, which is part of what this thing is actually also assessing. For my results, I was not surprised. I wasn't too high or too low. The thing that I was low on, which is the hyperachiever one, I wasn't surprised because I kind of saw the angles that those questions were going at. And we could probably dive into that a little bit later, especially since hyperachiever was kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum for Clark, closer to the top for you.
And just that's a good point. And hyperachiever, it's one of the saboteurs, and we'll get into a little bit to the definitions of these as we go. But the one thing for me is it shone a light on things I didn't really think about before. Example, the hyperachiever is my number 2 saboteur. But let me go back to you. Continue.
Yeah, I think that it actually the most value that it has from my perspective is just taking a step back, seeing some of the things of my own self-perception, and perhaps considering what some of the perception of others may be of me based on some of these saboteurs and how much of these elements apply. If it's on a scale of 1 to 10 and something is my highest rated saboteur at 7.5, then obviously not every characteristic of the saboteur is going to ring true for me. That's natural. Maybe even in the same way, if Clark, for example, has something that's at a 10, doesn't necessarily mean that everything that's within that saboteur is still going to be reflected as accurate for him either. But I do give him credit for putting together this scale and for putting together in this way. I think it's quite good and overlaps quite well with the book and some of the expanding thoughts. I do have some challenging parts of his writing. I think, Sileem, you kind of expressed this in a prior comment, but I have some challenges with some of his writing just from the standpoint of it's pushing along a narrative in some cases in the writing, and I'm not so certain that it's as objective in some cases where it's allowing for the reader or the learner to approach it from the angle of maybe their own experience. And it could be very specific to maybe some hard lessons or hard examples that he's trying to provide, and they don't really feel so flexible. It seems more about like sticking to the core of the narrative. So that was a little bit challenging for me, but I haven't sat with it as long as you have, Clark. And, I'm obviously interested in hearing a little bit more of your insights and your experience with the course as well, because my experience is very high level at this point.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because my experience with this material has actually been less about the book itself and more about how it's presented through the course and the app. There is a companion app to this. When you do the course, you get an app that puts you through some exercises, and he has a video each week that he does, and he talks about this. But it's not, the book is meant to be there as you're supposed to read the first 8 chapters to coincide with the course. hyper vigilant was your number one saboteur. And I'll read out the quick definition of the hyper vigilant just so people listening know what that means. So the hyper vigilant, and you scored 7.5. The hypervigilant makes you feel intense and continuous anxiety about all the dangers surrounding you and what could go wrong. It is constantly vigilant and can never rest. It results in a great deal of ongoing stress that wears you and others down. Its lie is, and this is what I like, is he always talks about the lie, what the saboteur is lying, the lie of this particular saboteur. The lie is that the dangers around you are bigger than they actually are, and that nonstop vigilance is the best way to tackle them. So the example he uses is this is like the guy who's been assigned to keep watch over the village, and every rustling in the bushes could be a tiger, and he's oh my God, there's danger. That's the example of where this served or didn't serve, because that would, even in the old days, to be screaming about a tiger coming every 5 minutes because he sees leaves blowing in the wind is super dangerous.
The boy who cried tiger.
Yeah, exactly. So what about that, any of that definition applies to you, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty broad. There was a piece that I did feel some identification with, just from the standpoint of some sensitivity to signals. So I have high level empathy and a tendency to pick up on a lot of things, not just obviously from my immediate surrounding and people around me, but in general. And that's partly what makes me a pretty effective listener as well. Mm-hmm. This maybe is kind of jumping right into the benefits in a way. But what rings true to me is kind of that element. There is some anxiety. I don't find that it is the continuous, intense anxiety that they defined it as, nor a constant expectation of mishap or danger, because that assumes that it's always from the angle of the dangers. I've found ways to kind of harness this energy or this saboteur in some ways to better understand or observe situations and be able to kind of step outside of myself or step outside of the situation, so I'm not going through that angle. I do have the tendency to have more of a self-dialogue and not the crying wolf part. So that then means that, am I burdening myself with worry or anxiety or observations that are unrealistic? It does kind of somewhat touch on the whole, how it can be a great deal of energy that is spent that can otherwise be put to good use. And yeah, that's absolutely accurate. I think if you're in a mode of kind of hypervigilance quite frequently, it's almost like you're in a fight or flight mode. You're spending way too much energy in trying to figure out and assess what the danger is in a situation and whether or not it needs to be acted on, instead of being in the moment or living your life for that matter.
I want to ask you something about, when I look at the definition a little deeper, and I do like further into the book, he talks about what the thoughts, what the feelings are of this character. And I'm thinking about, I've known you, Justin, for about 3 years, I guess, close to 4. And of course, whenever someone gets the results and you're waiting to hear what they are, you're gonna think about it. And me, for example, will think about what your results might be just on the basis of how well I know you, which we could argue isn't all that well to a large degree, right? I mean, it's not been that long, but we've spent a lot of time together. But I do find it interesting when I'll tell someone that avoider is my number one tendency. There are people that will say to me, "Really? I don't see you as an avoider." But others will say, "Oh, yeah, I could see that," like my wife, for example. So someone obviously who should know me more than the average person. So when I think about you and I read through some of this, suspicious of what others are up to, expectation that people will mess up, is that is there anything in there? Because I've seen a couple times where you have, for instance, people who have political ambition. I remember you perk up on that, and I wonder if that's a little bit of this saboteur coming up, that anytime someone mentions political ambitions, you tend to get your back up a little bit.
So yeah, I did find this interesting. So the might seek reassurance and guidance in procedures, rules, authorities, and institutions, and kind of tying that to the suspicious of what other people are up to. So, kids, cover your ears, but that's fucking bullshit. So I have a healthy skepticism around authorities. I don't seek reassurance in rules and authorities. I'm actually much more from the side of I've met enough politicians and people in these kinds of positions to have a healthy skepticism as to anything that's emitting from their mouth and what they're trying to do in terms of representing the broader interest versus their own. So from a suspicions of what others are up to, yeah, I've always had a healthy suspicion of people in unchecked powerful positions, or positions that had little to no oversight with them. So that side of things, there's definitely a hypervigilance. There's definitely a extreme skepticism, or even cynicism, I think is one of the words that they alluded to as well in the judge definition. But in terms of thinking that people might mess up, no, I think I generally assume that we're all going to mess up, and that we're all going to learn from these things. I don't really think of vigilance from that standpoint. I try to be there to support and encourage, if anything.
Okay. The vigilant one showed up for me. It was number 3. It's and for Sileem, you had it.
It was number 4 for me.
Scored as 4, and it was a 5 in terms. So each one is ranked. It's ranked, but then you get a score beside it saying how strong it is. So for you, Justin, it was a 7.5. Sileem, It was a 5, and for me, it was a 6.9. So it's fairly high up there. I definitely would connect with you on the anxiety aspect. Like, it definitely creates some anxiety, but right. I would say a lot of this doesn't really resonate for me. What about you, Sileem, on vigilance? Like, does any of that come through? You were fairly low score.
Yeah,
5,
yeah. I mean, because I got the 5 out of 10, so it's probably, I guess we can assume that means somewhere in the middle. So if the definition is always anxious, I guess for me then it's sometimes anxious, right. and it's kind of, I guess it's kind of true. I do have. As with Justin, a healthy suspicion of people who may not have the right motives to do certain things. I had a healthy suspicion of the author of this book. Justin said it a little bit more eloquently, but for me it was just there was something about how he was trying to really sell his theory here that just really kind of bugged me. I was like, okay, I get it. It's an interesting, you've got an interesting thing going here. I like your theory, very good, but you're overselling it. Like, you don't need to go that extra mile to tell me that this is the way to go. Like, this is what's going to change your life. I'm fairly skeptical of those messages, and so I guess there's my bit of hypervigilance. Yeah. Okay, so let's the rational one though, Justin. The hyper rational scored as pretty high up there for you. Does some more of the ones in there resonate? So the description is intense and exclusive focus on the rational processing of everything, including relationships, can be perceived as cold, distant, and intellectually arrogant.
Absolutely rings true. I think you're all beneath me.
Hey, this is my podcast.
Says you.
Although it's your Zoom, you're hosting us through Zoom, so you could always push the leave button. And well, no, I think we would still stay here anyway. If I leave, that would really screw us up.
Well, I mean, there is a very popular TV show on right now called Loki, based off of one of the characters from the Marvel universe. And if there's anyone who can consider themselves extremely intellectually arrogant, it would be Loki. Now, to answer your question, since this is your podcast, yes, I would say the intense and active mind part can definitely ring true, and the private and not letting some people into my deeper feelings part definitely can ring true. I'm a fairly private person about a lot of things that I keep people at arm's length about until there's the avenue for having the discussion. And I will be very willing to dive into very honest and open experiences, feelings, and maybe even plans that I may have around some of those very intensely private things. But again, because this is I'm middle of the road for some of these topics. And, I don't know if that's just my personality, my approach, I am a Libra. So, I've always found it kind of interesting that I have lived a lot of my life with a relative amount of balance. I'm also, my name Justin means justice, the balance of oneself and of justice in itself. So I don't know if I'm living my name, living my birth month, or if it's just a piece of how I grew up in an environment. And this kind of goes into what you were saying before, how the saboteurs are oftentimes informed by a lot of our experiences from, I think you said 0 to 16. I would definitely say that, yeah, there's pieces of this. There's pieces of this in also the hypervigilant part. The hypervigilant part specifically says hypervigilant often comes from early experiences where the source of safety and security, parentheses, parental figure, was an unpredictable and unreliable. And there were pieces of that. My relationship with my father was very, very challenging. So I would say that there's definitely pieces. So here I am, not being private. and sharing something that I believe is a definitely a foundational piece of why some of that anxiety and why some of that hypervigilance exists in how I still approach certain things and how I perceive danger, or how I may perceive the need to observe or be vigilant around dangers. It definitely is based on some experiences early on with parental figure. And then from a hyper-rational standpoint, there's certain things that were definitely very much modeled from the same person, from my father as well. That there were things that were, very much about the rational, and very, very, like, for him, it was very much about the cold side of things, because he grew up in a really tough environment, really, really tough environment with his own parents. So I'm not saying that it repeated itself in a mirror image. There's obviously, from generation to generation, one would hope you're improving upon certain things. And thankfully, he had my mother who put a lot of work into trying to have a healthy parenting relationship with myself and relationship with him, and to also give him the opportunity to develop and to grow. And, later on in his life now, we have a very close relationship, and I'm very fortunate for that. But looking back on it and reading these different pieces, these are all things that, I've done the work, he's done the work, we've done the work as a family to kind of work through some of this stuff. And it doesn't feel as familiar as maybe it once might have, but it's definitely there. It's an underlying piece of how I was raised, and maybe even how I related with other people to a certain point, until I started doing the work on myself and recognizing these behaviors and recognizing some of these things. So I think maybe if you go back 10, 15 years ago, maybe some of these things would rate much, much higher.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That was, I really appreciate you sharing the personal aspects of that. And he does say in the material that the worst of childhoods can totally be a factor, but also there is no childhood that won't have this development of the saboteurs, right? Because nobody's perfect. no situation is perfect. So even the most loving parents, you're still going to have elements of these saboteurs that get created, no matter how protective or how, because there's a whole bunch that we can get into, but the best of childhood still have a saboteur development in it. So that's important to note, that although a lot of this is rooted in childhood, it isn't necessarily because you had, a bad childhood or a rough childhood. So Sileem, and I'm starting to see that we could easily spend hours on this, but I want to move into yours, Sileem. So avoider was your top saboteur. It was also my top saboteur. My scoring was a 10 out of 10.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's very, very extreme, isn't it?
It is, but it is
the ultimate avoider.
True. It is definitely the avoider and the pleaser were the ones I expected to see rank up there for me. The pleaser, it's sort of a close tie for third, I guess. But your score on avoider, what did you? Let me read the avoider for those that. So a focus on the positive and pleasant in an extreme way, an avoidance of difficult and unpleasant tasks and conflicts. Some characteristics of this are they avoid avoiders avoids conflict and says yes to things that aren't actually desired, downplays importance of some real problems and tries to deflect others, has difficulty saying no, resists others through passive-aggressive means rather than directly, loses self in comforting routines and habits, procrastinates on unpleasant tasks. A few of those rang for sure true for me. How about for you, Sileem?
That is me. That is exactly who I am. I was saying earlier that the theory of the saboteurs I thought was a really good theory, and I suppose the reason why I say that was because of the 9 what were these called, the associate saboteurs, next to the accomplice saboteurs, right? The judge is the main saboteur.
The judge uses these saboteurs. Right. It's like he's the master of ceremonies of all these saboteurs.
The master of disaster. So if I were actually to rank all of my saboteurs myself, I probably come up with the same result that the assessment gave me. And my top 3 were avoider, and then hyper-rational and pleaser, and hyper-vigilant was fourth. And I totally agree with that result. It is exactly who I am. Avoider, in the sense that I do not like conflict, or I don't like conflict if I can avoid it, which I guess is the theme here. And I will procrastinate. I will leave things till the last minute if I can, because I'm the kind of person just thinks, well, I could do it at the last minute and still get it done. There's it's not a good thing at all, but it's just some confidence somewhere that's completely unfounded. I guess it's worked okay so far, which is why I was thinking, maybe these saboteurs aren't as bad as they actually sound, even though I know like procrastinating is not good at all. The hyper-rational aspect completely agreed with as well, as my number 2. I try to rationalize everything. I try very hard not to let my emotions drive my thought process and my actions. And where it relates to the past, my parents were actually fairly emotional people, and they had a lot of emotional discussions and arguments, and I would hear all that as a child and think, wait, like, that doesn't make sense, or there are better ways to have that discussion, and part of that was because my parents were of different cultures and nationalities. My mom was Japanese, my father was Egyptian, and there was always going to be that in international or multicultural family, you're gonna have that. You're gonna have these sort of clashes or disagreements that seem like they can be resolved in a fairly smart and rational way. Yet somehow they don't, and I saw that growing up as a child, and I always thought to myself, I don't want to be that. I want to be super rational. I want to get rid of all emotion from discussions and from conversations, and just really focus on the rational element of everything. Just rationalize everything, and that's really stuck with me. And I really found that these results really reflected who I am as a person, interestingly.
Well, thank you for sharing that too. You're the very personal experience.
Yeah,
I know we're on the couch here. I guess
we're all on the couch with Dr. Luby.
Well, I mean, I guess I got to lie on the couch a bit too.
Turn the mirror.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the avoider.
Open your heart.
Yeah, number one for me, the avoider, a 10 scored. I mentioned it's and one thing I will say is that he also he talks about how often the intent behind these saboteurs and what we're trying to get out of it by having, by pleasing people or by avoiding conflict actually produces the opposite in many cases. And when I think about that, it absolutely rings true. So the avoider has difficulty saying no. Absolutely. One of my strongest traits is difficulty of saying no. Avoids conflict, says yes to things that aren't actually desired. Yeah, because it's easier. And I don't disappoint if I say yes versus no. The passive aggressive part, not so sure about that. Has difficulty saying no. Resists others through passive aggressive means rather than directly. I think if I explore that a bit more, maybe I would see some more patterns around that. Loses self in comforting routines and habits. Oh my God, absolutely. Procrastinates on unpleasant tasks. Yeah, that couldn't be more true. I will slide over, and if I'm getting something uncomfortable I don't want to deal with, that's when I'll go start, surfing the internet or pull out a book or listen to a podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Get out of the plate.
That's so me too. That's so me.
I'll just decide, you know what? I need to go pick something up at the store. That'll give me 20 minutes in the car. I can listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast or something, or listen to a repeat of one of my own episodes. I'm always searching for some way to get away from it.
An excuse. Yeah.
So as far as the child piece, there was some navigation within my own home around avoiding and pleasing, in order to, I had a good childhood, a very good childhood, loving parents, supportive, but conflict in our house was not generally public. So I would say, and when it was scary. Oh my God, mom and dad are arguing. Maybe they're going to get divorced. Which is very different than how we've tried to be in our house. My wife will always say, because I will say to her, no, this conversation, we need to wait till the kids are asleep, or let's have it in the car when we're by ourselves. And she's like, no, the kids need to hear conflict. They need to hear us have a disagreement and work it out. Whereas in my family, conflicts were taken behind closed doors, and you generally didn't hear too much, except when I would look for it. I was one of those kids who was always behind a corner trying to eavesdrop on my parents, trying to gain insights and information about what was happening behind the scenes, because it wasn't generally open. And my father comes from a super conservative background, still conservative to this day. Open discussions around sex, forget it. All my learnings were in the schoolyard. So,
wait, what school did you go to? I missed out.
It was the things that your kids would tell you, and you would be like, "Oh my God, no ways!" And then you'd pull a closer friend aside and say, "Is that really what happens?" It's like, because I didn't feel that my parents were a place I could go for that kind of information. So, lots of stuff in the avoider absolutely rings true for me. But I'm enjoying this course as a way to, in the course, you get opportunities to do these exercises. So every day there's 3 exercises you do. They're about 2 minutes each, where it's a bit of a meditative thing. You close your eyes and you think through an experience you had, or you think through a future experience you might have where one of these saboteurs might get enabled. Like, for instance, if you have meetings for the day, you can think ahead of those meetings, and are there a situation in there where the avoider saboteur might rear its ugly head? And in my job, in all of our jobs, we're dealing with other people generally, and the ability to look ahead and say, oh, there's a meeting I have later today with an individual who I maybe have challenges with, and the avoider saboteur will be sitting right up there on my chest, protecting me. Don't go down that road. Don't ask those questions. Don't try to delve into why there's an issue. Just agree, nod. Easy is for me to fall into that trap. So what I like about the course is that you get this opportunity to think ahead of and to notice when the judge is acting up. And the best analogy that they have is if you think of the judge like putting your hand on a hot stove, or the way that the judge can really wreak havoc is by when you put your hand on the stove, you don't take it off. You just continue to burn your hand. The healthier thing is when you get an avoider feeling or hypervigilant feeling, feel it for that second when it burns the hand, and then lift it off, right? It's like, okay, there it is. Identify it, label it, as he says. These are neural pathways that have been created over 49 years of my life, mm-hmm. that don't just get reversed by thinking, oh, I won't think that way. You have to actually train the brain to approach these things differently. And that's what this course generally is training you to do, is through these exercises, trying to reprogram those neural pathways, that it doesn't just go to the instinctual, like, oh my God, I've got to be hyper rational, or I've got to please here, or I've got to avoid, or whatever your saboteur is. So, yeah.
If I may, I mean, on that very topic, from the standpoint of reprogramming and working through the way that you've actually been handling or processing these things in the past, it makes me think of how a lot of creatives, especially writers and musicians, they'll put themselves up against a deadline, and they'll oftentimes say, like, that's where my creativity comes out, or that's, mm-hmm. when I ratchet up the pressure, that's mm-hmm. when I can really, I know I have to deliver. I know I have this deadline, these artificial, deadlines that we create for ourselves by procrastinating, by pushing back against these things. And I think a lot of times it's a self-narrative that we create, saying like, yeah, I can really deliver. I can really handle it when I'm in that intense mode. But you don't really have a choice. You're putting yourself in that position. You no longer have a choice. You have to deliver. That is your job. That is your personal responsibility, or whatever it is that you have to do. Yep. So to say that you couldn't do it otherwise just is a farce. I mean, you're basically you're giving up before even actually trying to do it maybe in a healthier way. And I know I've been guilty of this at times too, of going down this path of putting myself up against the deadline and insinuating to myself that, I can be more creative in this moment. But is that really true? I mean, when you're really in that kind of intense, almost fight or flight, to use that phrase again, type of framing, I mean, you're not really going to be at your most creative. You're not really going to be at your optimal. You're just doing the best with what you have in that moment.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a great quote by a guy named Samuel Johnson, who's like a quote machine. And I think it's attributed to him. And that is that all important thought arises from leisure. My biggest thoughts they're not when I sit down at a table and think, oh my God, let's have a great thought right now. David Allen created a system called Getting Things Done, which is all about mind like water, that the best place you can be is in a sort of karate-like stance, ready for anything. Come an angle from over here, something from over there. And he uses a martial arts reference in here, actually, that you're not going to be able to beat up 6 bandits or whatever who are trying to attack you from multiple angles. If you're going if you're going crazy, you're going to get yourself killed. So the way that you deal is get approach from left, parry that blow, turn to the right, parry that blow. It's going to be in a methodical way. It's not going to be in a crazy maker kind of way. This episode is brought to you by Pace Painting. Pace Painting, serving all your painting needs, whether commercial or residential. Reach Pace Painting at paintwithpace@gmail.com or via their Facebook page, Pace Painting Inc. Or call Peter at 289-356-7744. Paint with Pace. Well, we should move on. We wanted to talk a little bit quickly about that Think Week, and probably not going to do it justice, but let's just talk about it for a sec. So Bill Gates takes a week, I think a year, where he holes himself up in a cottage or a cabin somewhere, no connectivity to the internet. It's a fairly minimalist space with a book or a notebook. I think he brings us some books along with him. He's basically disconnected from the outside world, but he uses this opportunity to think. Hence the term Think Week. And we were thinking, between the three of us, what if we could take the results of something like this or some other insights we have about ourselves, and could we hole ourselves up and really take time to think through some of this stuff? Or is this just, for a couple weeks we'll read about this, see the value, or not see it, and then just push it off to the side and move on with life? What about having a Think Week for you guys would work or not work?
Well, funny. You were just saying that you get some of your best thoughts when you're relaxed and when you're not under pressure. And wouldn't something like a Think Week be absolutely perfect for something like that? To just be able to totally disconnect from the world and kind of just relieve yourself of all worries and stresses, and just get into a zone and leave yourself with your, I guess, with your thoughts and your mind wide open, I guess, to ideate and create. That would be amazing. I wish we all had the kind of luxury that Bill Gates has to be able to do that. I suppose we could do that. It's not I guess I don't know. Maybe I suppose I can just speak for myself here, but I guess I could convince my wife that I want to, disappear for a week. Maybe. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'd need to try.
Why, Sileem? Where are you going?
Justin, you were talking earlier when we were prepping about and you alluded to it just now, Sileem, about the position of privilege potentially that having a Think Week, is much more enabled by perhaps being a billionaire. Or talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Sileem was saying too, and also talking through the positive intelligence piece and what you were alluding to there at the end, and how some of your best thoughts have come during these times where you were not having all of these external pressures. It made me think about how many times have I said to myself, or have I heard other people say, I had this great idea when I was in the shower, or I had this thought, or whatever, right? And why is it the shower? It's not the shower. It's quiet. It's space. You're not focused on anything else. You're just allowed to freely think, or allowing those thoughts to come through. And it made me think of, yes, while it is a privilege to be able to take that amount of time, a week of time, on your own. We all have responsibilities professionally, personally, and otherwise. Some of us have children. We all have families in some way, shape, or form, whether it be a spouse and children. We have professional obligations and deadlines to meet and everything else. But if we're going to take a vacation with our family, or if we're going to take a few days or a weekend for ourselves, this priority that we're putting to this, it's something that we're trying to tap into, something that is true to ourselves, and to maybe, as Sileem was alluding to as well, allow a certain amount of ideation and creation to come through. I think it's a wonderful thought. I do think there is privilege in all of what we're talking about, in terms of having the space, the time, and the energy to work on oneself. There's a lot of people that don't have that opportunity. They're maybe working more than one job. Maybe they're a single parent and their plate is full with all of the things that they have to do related to that. Or just in general, they're living in a tough environment, tough situation, or whatever else, and they have to kind of live from moment to moment. So all of this stuff, everything in this course and what we're talking about in terms of a Think Week, it does involve having a healthy framework, healthy approach to one's life, and to improvement, and to living in best intentions, I'll say. So I want to acknowledge that more than anything, because this topic, while something important to all of us and hopefully important to many people, so they can live a more fulfilling life for themselves and for those around them, it's maybe easier said than done for some. And I think that while it is a great concept, maybe there's other ways of doing this that would be maybe more authentic to different people in their situations. Just as mindfulness meditation and other things have kind of come into more popular thought or popular approaches to life. You see it happening in schools at this point as well. I don't see a block from some variation of this being something that we can all make a part of our weekly or monthly routine, that there is something that we're taking a piece. It doesn't have to be a week. It doesn't have to be, we live full bore for 340 days of the year, and, vacation for maybe 10 of those days, and then a 7-day Think Week or something like that. But, there could be a variation of this that I think we can make maybe more regularly put into our schedules.
I'd say the closest to it would be a meditation of some type.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people might be able to get bite-sized opportunities to do that. And I think it's probably the most common thing that I hear people are trying to do, but just can never seem to make a habit. And what I like about this course is that most of the things you can either do, he has the 2-minute reflections or exercises that you do 3 times a day. I think about 12 minutes of reflecting and listening. But he has something called the PQ Gym, which you can pop into and do anywhere from 2-minute to 12-minute exercises, of which 2 minutes is such a nice number. Like, there's very few times you can't step away from what you're doing and take 2 minutes to just be meditative in a sense, like just to listen to the sounds around you, to touch something and feel it, or look at the shape of something, something as simple as your phone or your wallet. Like, just look at the texture of the case or the grains of the leather, just to take a moment and focus on the shades. I found extremely useful. So 2 thoughts before we finish off with our strange news story. I question, what would or could we be with a Think Week? If we really did get that opportunity to get that 5 days, 7 days, whatever it is, Think Week, to reflect and think, what could we be? Who would we be? What kind of parent would we be?
The next Bill Gates. For sure. For sure. I'd be a billionaire. Come on.
There's something in there.
Hands down. No.
There's something there in that, right? The chance to think about vision, your own life vision, your company's vision. Maybe you come up with an idea, an invention or something. So there was that, and then also I think the meditative thing I mentioned, but also I think we seek some of this in other ways too, like a guy's trip. Get the guys together, go away for a weekend, and party it up and get away from. It's sort of a think week filled with beer and late nights and carousing generally, but it's a bit of a think week variation maybe. And I've had a few of those, not recently, but
I think fishing could be very therapeutic as well. I love fishing.
Okay, I'm going to move into my weird news story. We've got only a few minutes here. So this isn't really a strange news story, but what it is Google Trends. I've referred to it before in a previous episode. The most searched terms. You can use Google Trends in a lot of really funny and creative ways. Actually, this is each state's most searched misspelled words. I had to think about what this was actually saying. These are the words by state, and I won't go through every state, that are the most searched when someone types the words how to spell. So, how to spell, as an example, the state of California's most common how to spell insert word is separate. Separate. I'll give you the top one in a sec. Other states' most searched words. Texas searching for the word, how to spell the word confident.
Was the second one truck nuts?
Believe in the state of, looks like North Dakota. I might be totally wrong.
That I and E can always be confusing for some.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some. I'm sure there's some I and E other results in this one.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Florida.
Wait. Sister cousin. No,
Alligator.
This is an outlier for sure because a number of them are the same. But Pharaoh. Like the Pharaoh, like Pharoah.
That's weird.
Pharaoh.
Maybe because there's so many old people there that are wondering if they could be buried with their possessions.
Ah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No,
makes a lot of sense.
It's an unusual one. Here's one that I actually get tripped up on now and then. Exercise. Spelled EX. Sometimes it's...
Wait, I would like to overlay that with the statistics of obesity in that state.
It looks like it could be at Georgia. I should send you guys the thing because...
the number 2 search is Chick-fil-A locations then.
The number 1 misspelled word that was searched for... the common misspelling, the most searched for word was quarantine.
Quarantine.
I don't know if I can get this out without... So the most common misspelling of the word, as I guess, as you're putting this in, you don't know how it's spelled, right? So you're going to put you're going to sound it out. The most common misspelling of quarantine was corn, CORN, space teen, TEEN.
Yeah.
Quarantine.
I'm hearing the accent as you...
Quarantine.
Quarantine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh, so yes. In Pennsylvania, the most misspelled word was coronavirus, so a couple related to the COVID-19.
How do you misspell coronavirus? That's... Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish they provided, like on quarantine, it was good because they actually wrote out how people misspelled it or how they were trying to sound it out, I guess. I don't
Quarantine.
know.
Quarantine and coronavirus.
Other words making the list were favorite. Favorite. Now,
were they spelling it British style with the...
I spell favorite with a U.
Yeah.
So do I. But how is it spelled in the U.S.?
Without the U.
Yeah.
VOR.
VOR.
How do you... So can you spell it how you would spell it in the U.S., Justin?
FAVORITE.
Okay. Yeah. So that's one that people did look up a lot.
Yeah.
Which, WHICH, every, commonly misspelt EVARY.
Okay, I can't help you on that one.
Definitely. And then separate was the other one. So
I must say, though, very briefly, there are some times that I'm just typing something up and a very simple word, I don't know, like which, for instance, would just really trip me up. And I just think to myself, why is it spelled like that? Like, I just pause. I freak out for a moment, and it's like, whoa, like, why are we spelling which like that? Like, there's something like, yeah, there's something wrong with that.
I used to always spell it W. As a kid, I would get corrected on it. I would put WICH.
Yeah.
Because, why the hell is there an H? Now, whip, which, whittle, like, we know, because we're familiar with English, that WH is very common. It almost does have a W sound to it. And of course, there are many weird things in the English language that make no sense. The word night or knife with a K. Like, what is that? Why is K silent? It doesn't make any sense at all. But I agree, Sileem, that when I feel like, is this just our brains operating in some sort of weird hyperdrive?
Right,
that's starting to question it, like the reasons why something is spelt a certain way, or are we? I mean, you have familiarity with several different languages as well. I don't know if that factors in at all. That the fact you can speak Japanese, Arabic, English, does that trip you up? Do you get a bit of a second look at things because of that?
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Like, I can't explain it, but something about those sort of very different languages come into play when I'm working with one of those languages, and something just happens to my brain. It just gets fried for a moment.
Well, in English specifically, you just use the example of knife and night with a KN, right? And I remember the first time I heard the word knish, the Jewish snack.
Yeah.
It's basically a filling with dough fried around it. And the first time I heard it was one thing. And then when I saw the spelling, I was like, oh, come on. What about knife and night? And then you're hearing knish. It's like, why don't we say knife and knight?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, certainly could do an episode on word origins, but we are out of time. So
Unfortunately.
It'd be interesting to see what you guys do with the positive intelligence stuff from here. I mean, I'm another 2 weeks into finishing the course, so I certainly can let everybody know how it goes, like where it ultimately ends up. There's a lot more to this whole thing that I'll talk about maybe at another time. But guys, thanks for joining me on your Friday night. I will enjoy my own Friday and Friday night a few hours into the future. But as always, it's great having you guys on.
Well, from the future.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's been a great Friday. So yeah, thanks for having us.